Oh, you almost caught me mid-coffee there. Hey, welcome to Lecture 6, which is Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Go ahead and get out your Old Testament timeline, and that's found in your course documents folder. You want to get used to this. You want to pull it out regularly. You probably want to print a copy off so you can just pull it out in front of you whenever we refer to it. So far in the course, we've offered a brief review of Genesis and some of the themes in Exodus in the previous lecture. You may have noticed that the readings for us in the course go straight from Exodus to Deuteronomy, which is the final book in the Torah. If the Torah is 5 books long, why did we skip 2 of them in the reading, Leviticus and Numbers? Well, first of all, we only have 8 weeks in the course, so, there's going to have to be some corners cut somewhere. And I wish that we had more time to spend in the Torah before moving on, but the Old Testament's pretty big and we got a lot of material to cover. So, let's see. The text in Leviticus and Numbers is a little bit thick. And it's hard to follow without more time to sit on it. So it's probably a good idea just to briefly summarize them here rather than add a whole lot more to your reading. Leviticus, in short, is how to be a priest and how to deal with the holiness aspect of God. It is very relational. It's a very earthy book. It's relational in how it answers the question, how do we go about bridging the gap between God and us while respecting the holiness of God? And it's earthy in that it uses dirt and blood and other common elements in the rituals. Numbers, however, comments more on the narrative of Moses and the Israelites. We get back into the story a little bit more, but you've also got the counting up of the armies and the counting up of the clans and the leaders of the clans and all of that. So far in the narrative overall, we've got Moses has brought the people out of Egypt, and they've all escaped from Pharaoh. Moses brought the Israelites to Mount Sinai and obtained the 10 Commandments and the law. There was the Mosaic covenant made with the people, between the people and God. From there, the Israelite people continued to move on towards the land that Yahweh promised them, hence the promised land. The book of Numbers tells what happens after the Exodus when they got close to the promised land. It's actually a short distance-wise between Egypt and Palestine or Israel. You could probably walk it in 2 weeks, but they went out into the wilderness first for a little while just because a group of slaves who'd been free for all of a few weeks was not ready to go in and attack fortified cities and armies, so they head out into the wilderness. And after a couple months, they send some spies to go and to spy out the land. And so there's 12 spies that go, one from each of the different tribes. When I was a kid, we learned a song in summer camp. 12 men went to spy on Canaan, 10 were bad and 2 were good. Maybe some of you know that. Maybe not. There's lots of verses to it, but anyways, they go to spy out the land, and the 12 of them return back to the Israelite people in the wilderness, and they all agree the land is great. It's fertile. The crops are fantastic. They also all agree that the enemy is strong. But 2 of the guys, Joshua and Caleb, say, hey, the enemy is strong, but we can attack them with God on our side. God will lead us, and we can take the land that he's promised us. But the other 10 spies say, no, if we go and try and attack them, we will get clobbered. And so the people, rather than listening to Joshua and Caleb and rather than trusting God, decide to trust the other 10, and they're too fearful. They tell Moses, we're not going to attack we're not going to take the land. And so God says, okay, because you didn't trust me, you're going to wander around in the wilderness for 40 years until this whole generation of people who didn't trust me die off. It's going to be your kids and grandkids that actually go in and take the land. Moses also gets mad sometimes and does a few things that are kind of shameful acts. He gets mad at one point in time about the people complaining about they don't have water, fresh water to drink, and so instead of asking God, he hammers on the rock, and water does come out. God provides water, but finally God says, Moses, you're not going to get to go into the land either, and Moses never does enter the land, but he does lead the people in the 40 years of wandering. So at this point, Deuteronomy comes into play. So while we're making the shift, go ahead and notice where all of these books fall on the timeline. We're now past the universal history and the period of the patriarchs. The Exodus has happened, and now we are in the wilderness leading up to the entrance of Canaan and the book of Deuteronomy. If you need to, go ahead and pause the lecture here and observe the timeline. I know we're working through it rather rapidly, just because we have to. So let's move on to Deuteronomy for the rest of this lecture. So Deuteronomy, in short, it's Moses' final sermon to the future Israelites because, as I said, Moses was not allowed to enter into the promised land with them. So this is final talk. In Deuteronomy, it reiterates the history of what's come before. Because of this, there's repetition in Deuteronomy. You get some material in Deuteronomy that you had in Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers. For example, the Ten Commandments and the other laws make their reappearance here with some minor differences, but for the most part, it's pretty similar. Moses was really laying it out so that the Israelites do not forget where they came from or what the law is, so that they can continue to grow in a close relationship with Yahweh in the future. Though, as we'll see in future modules, they kind of mess this up big time. For now, let's take a look at the structure of Deuteronomy. Remember, the Old Testament is not written in a vacuum. There are other people groups that are living in the area of the ancient Near East that the Jewish people have been in contact with and continue to come in contact with. They understand their different customs, and they take part in those different customs. So it's important for you to understand that. And the book of Deuteronomy actually reflects what's called a vassal treaty, and it's a genre that's found elsewhere in the ancient Near East. A vassal treaty is a treaty made between a king and a subservient group. It's a way of keeping the peace. It structures itself something like this: as long as you do these things, then I, as the king, promise to do these things. But if you break these things, then I will come back and do these bad things to you. All right. History is used as a motivating force in a vassal treaty. Remember when I did this? Remember when I said this? Those kinds of things. The king writing the vassal treaty will often reinforce the instruction with blessings and curses. Love and loyalty are often interchangeable in these treaties. So as you go in your reading in Deuteronomy, notice this vassal treaty genre in chapter 28 of Deuteronomy. The difference between the vassal treaties of the ancient Near East generally and the Deuteronomy vassal treaty is that the structure of a vassal treaty is being used differently or theologically in Deuteronomy for Israel's love for God and God's love for Israel. With the end of Deuteronomy comes the end of the Torah, which is also known as the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. We've seen in the Torah creation, ancestral cycles, also known as the patriarch narratives, the Exodus, the giving of the law, and now finally we have the entrance to the promised land. Well, the story ends here, or the Torah ends here. The story does not end here. Next, leading into the books of Joshua and Judges, we'll see that the conquest of the Israelites to take this land, and how in some moments they failed to keep the Torah that God has given to them. All right, so that's what's coming up next.